Follow your passions. That's what almost every graduation speaker says to the new graduates. It's almost cruel. If all you've been doing is school and school-like stuff, how do you have any idea what your passions might be or how to follow them? Following your passions, discovering your passions, requires lots of time to play and explore. But we've pretty much removed play from young people's lives. Over the past few decades, we've greatly increased the amount of time that children must spend at school and at schoolwork at home and at school-like activities outside of school. We've more or less turned childhood into a time of resume building. But you can't find passions by building a resume, by trying to please other people. You find your passions by doing what you love to do. It's no surprise, therefore, that people who are famous for their passionate achievements have often declared their dislike of, even their hatred for school. Here are just a few examples. Einstein, this coercion of school had such a deterring effect that after I had passed the final examination, I found the consideration of any scientific problems distasteful for an entire year. Edison, I was never able to get along at school. I was at the foot of my class. Churchill, how I hated school and what a life of anxiety I lived there. I counted the hours to the end of every term. Annie Sullivan, I'm beginning to suspect all elaborate and special systems of education. They seem to be built up on the supposition that every child is a kind of idiot who must be taught to think. Margaret Mead, my grandmother wanted me to have an education, so she kept me out of school. Beatrix Potter, thank goodness I was never sent to school. It would have rubbed off some of the originality. Henry David Thoreau, what does an education do? It makes a straight-cut ditch out of a meandering brook. Mark Twain, who said so many things, soap and education are not as sudden as a massacre, but they're more deadly in the long run. And Dolly Parton, quite appropriately the only one in color here, I hated school. Even to this day, when I see a school bus, it's just depressing to me, the poor little kids. Some years ago, Kirsten Olson, who was at that time a graduate student at Harvard, began to do research on how highly successful people were inspired by their experiences at school. But her early findings led her to turn that thesis around by 180 degrees. Here's the book that came out of that work, Wounded by School. And here's a quotation from the foreword to that book. I'll read just a little piece of it. Olson expected to hear stories of joyful and productive learning. Instead, she discovered the shadows of pain, disappointment, even cynicism in their vivid recollections of schooling. Instead of the light she expected, she found darkness. Since the time that Olson's respondents would have been in school, school has become even more oppressive. Over the past few decades, we've greatly decreased, even eliminated recess from schools, even from elementary schools. We've removed much of the creative activity that used to be part of the curriculum from the curriculum. We've increased homework, all in the name of improving scores on multiple choice, one right answer, standardized tests. The results of this are exactly what we should have been able to predict. Over these same decades, creative thinking has declined at all grade levels among school-aged children. Anxiety, depression, suicide have greatly increased over this period of time. A recent poll by the American Psychological Association revealed that teenagers are now the most stressed out people in America, and 83% of them attribute their stress to school. But now I want to turn to a happier topic and tell you about my youngest brother, Fred Carlson. He's got a different last name from mine because he has a different father. He's 12 years younger than me. So he started first grade in public school at the same time that I started college. He lasted in that public school through 4th grade. And when he was in 4th grade, about that time, his mother, my mother, became something of a hippie and moved on to a commune in Vermont. And Fred left school at that point and went to a little free school that my mother had helped to start, where he was free to do what he wished, follow his own interests, develop his passions, if you will. That school only was not certified for high school, however, so when he was 14, he enrolled in the public school for 9th grade. But on the second day there in public school, and this is the honest truth, the principal of the school said to him, "We don't like you hippie types around here." It's the best thing that could have happened to him. He left school that day and never returned. He spent the next couple of years hanging around the commune. He helped to build a house and developed a love of wood and carpentry. He learned to play the guitar and the banjo. When he was 16, he heard about a program for high school dropouts, a publicly supported program, and so he enrolled there. The head of that program asked him what he'd like to do, and he said, "I think I'd like to build a banjo." So nobody there knew anything about banjo building, but the head of the program helped Fred find a guy in the community who had a woodworking shop and knew a little bit about banjo building, a guy named Ken. And with Ken's help, Fred built a banjo. After that, Fred spent the little bit of money that his father had saved for his education to take a 6-week course in guitar building and use the rest of the money to buy the tools he needed to set up his workshop. The rest is history. By the time Fred was 21 years old, one of his beautiful handmade guitars was already on display at the Smithsonian Museum. Since then, he's produced one instrument after another, each one a new invention, each one entirely different from any of the others. Most of them are made for serious concert building, but some, as you can see in the lower right-hand part of the slide here, are just purely for whimsy. As part of my research, I have spent a good deal of time studying the consequences of self-directed education, studying the outcomes for people who have not gone to a conventional school, a school where there's a curriculum and tests and all of that, but who rather took charge of their own education. Some of my first research of that sort was a study of the graduates of the Sudbury Valley School many years ago. This is a school in Massachusetts where children from age 4 on through high school age are free to follow their own interests essentially all the time. And more recently, I conducted a study of grown unschoolers. These are people who are legally homeschoolers, but who don't do school at home, are not bound by any curriculum, but rather play and explore and pursue their own interests. The most interesting thing that I found from both of these studies for our purposes here is that many of these as people, as young adults, were pursuing careers that were direct extensions of the passionate interests that they had developed in play as children. So here's just a few examples. One girl who loved to play with boats when she was a little girl went on as a teenager to apprentice herself to a ship captain. And at the time of the study, she was captain of a cruise ship herself. Another girl liked to play with dolls, as many little girls do. And she went from that to making doll clothes and then making clothes for herself and her friends. By the time of our study, she was the head pattern maker at a large company in the high fashion dress industry. Another boy, in this case, loved constructive play. He would, as a child, make whole villages of plasticine to scale, make factories to scale of plasticine. As he got a little older, he began to hang around local garages, and he learned automobile mechanics by watching and asking questions. At the time of our study, he was a much sought-after machinist and inventor. There's another one who loved, as a child, science fiction. He was passionately involved with science fiction. He would devour one science fiction story after another. And through science fiction, he discovered mathematics, and he became passionate about mathematics. Today, he's a professor of mathematics. There was another who, at the time of the study, was doing nothing but computers. He was fascinated by, absolutely passionate about computers, spending all his time doing computers. At the time of the study, he was 22 years old. He was founder and president of a computer software development company that was doing multi-million dollars of business a year. And I could go on with many other examples. As part of my preparation for this talk, I asked some of my unschooling friends about their children's interests. And here are 3 examples that I want to share with you. Carrie McDonald's daughter, Molly, has many passionate interests, one of which is baking. A couple of years ago, somebody asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up, and she said, "A baker, but I already am one." One of the things that I've learned from my studies of children on an unschooling path is that they don't distinguish, they don't divide life into a period of preparing for the future, followed by a period of living that future. They don't distinguish between learning and doing. That's true when they're children, and it's also true when they're grown up. To the right of Molly is her younger brother, Jack, who's passionately into photography. In the upper photo, we see him looking at the book, a book of photographs by one of the famous landscape photographers that he very much admires. To the lower right in the slide is one of Jack's own photographs called Reflections. In the upper right-hand corner is Akilah Richards' daughter, Marley. Marley, I think, is 13, maybe 14 in this picture. She is a voice actress. She has had gigs providing the voice for animations, for fan fiction audios. She has an absolutely beautiful voice. She's passionately involved in that. And through her interest in voice, she also developed a passionate interest in Japanese and taught herself Japanese because some of the animations that she most enjoys are produced in Japan. She's also now tutoring another young person in Japanese. So how does school thwart passions? The answer to that is almost too obvious. It does so by requiring that everybody do the same thing at the same time. It's not possible for all the children in a room to be passionately interested in the same thing at the same time. It does so by displacing intrinsic motivation and substituting for it extrinsic motivators like grades and honors and trophies. You can't develop passionate interests by aiming for grades and honors and trophies, trying to please other people. You have to do what you love to do, regardless of what other people think of it, regardless of what kind of grade they're going to give you for it. It does so by inducing fear, fear of failure, fear of embarrassment. Fear freezes the mind and prevents the development of passionate interests. It does so by teaching that there's one right answer to every question and one right way to do whatever it is you're supposed to do. That's a surefire way to nip any possible developing interest in the bud. It does so by distinguishing between learning, which is called work, and play, which is clearly separated from learning. It's a break from learning called recess, if it exists at all at school. But anybody who's involved in a passionate interest knows that at least when you're involved in that interest, work and play and learning are all one and the same thing. So, in conclusion, if we want our children to grow up with passionate interests, we have to find an alternative to school, at least an alternative to school as we know it today. Or at minimum, we have to reduce the power of school in our children's lives, reduce the effects of school, and greatly increase the amount of time that our children have to do what children are designed to do, which is to play, explore, discover what they love to do, and to pursue that passion. Now, I know that this thesis runs counter to deeply held beliefs in our culture about the value of school. And maybe it runs counter to some of your beliefs. but I hope that I've given you at least something to think about, and I thank you very, very much for your kind attention.